this is the third week of school, or people are ready. People have been bombarded with a lot of information now.
Just wait.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of lectures, a lot of information. You can learn a lot of things, but probably it's all packed into your mind. So now let's start with some exercise. So before I talk about single molecule experiment, so first this will be a slightly different topic, and most of the talks are theory, and this is on biological systems and some experiment. But I would like to ask you questions first. So I believe most of you have heard about single molecule experiment. It just sounds cool, right? Single molecule. But why do people do single molecule? I remember a few years ago we had single molecule conferences, and in the end that was the question. It was very hard to do single molecule experiment, and it's not like you do one experiment and you're done. Versus ensemble measurement. So usually you have to collect a lot of data, right? To get statistics. Here we know a lot about statistics mechanics. And then, so for doing, and then you know, if you work on a small system, you measure signals coming from a single molecule. You're going to have a lot of fluctuations, drift, and noise. So, what's the reason to do single molecule? And there are several. So, anybody want to suggest some?
Because it's cool.
One, that's I think that's how it gets started. More? For biological for biological systems, that's true. It's very complex. That's getting to direction. It's very complex. So we'll see if we can somehow isolate the system. It's a system you can study. And more?
To get more information out of it than publish over the ensemble?
Right, so that's the idea. Everybody is thinking about that. Okay, we can get more information out rather than ensemble. But how? And do we actually get that? So, any more?
It's KBT physics. You can see thermal fluctuations.
Okay, so if you're thinking in terms of a non-equilibrium statistical mechanics, okay, you want to look at the systems at this scale. Sure. So from physics point of view, perhaps we actually want this type of a system. From biological, maybe there is some advantage. And in addition to being cool, and we'll try to do something. And then so that at the end of the third lecture, I'll ask you, so we want to get some more information on it. What kind of information can we get on it? So that will be something I will talk through these lectures, and also something for people to work on, because actually there's a lot of information there, and it was actually not extracted. So let's start, since we're getting pretty close. So I'll give 3 lectures on the single molecule experiments. First, I'll talk about a brief introduction and talk about basic techniques, so you're familiar with what are being measured and what are doable and what are the things that can be improved. And then the second one, I'll talk about principles involved in interpreting these force measurements. So that's the heart of these measurements. It's difficult, but we hope we'll get more out of it. And then, of course, everything in the end will apply to real systems. Okay. So first, I'll talk about So I have to talk about the introduction, the background and motivation. And the experiment now focus on three main techniques: atomic force microscopy, optical tweezers, and magnetic tweezers. So this is a general outline of different techniques. The first is the cantilever systems, sometimes called SFM, scanning force microscopy, or atomic force microscopy, or scanning probe microscopy, SPM. And usually FM measure the forces on a higher force range. So usually on the order of tens of hundreds of giganewtons. And the AFM has the advantage of high spatial resolution and accuracy. And the cantilever stiffness usually is harder, relatively speaking. And the stiffness usually is, the typical cantilever use will be on the order of 0.05 Newton per meter. And so the applications usually are proteins, polysaccharides, and bond strength. They're stronger bonds to be pulled apart. And the advantages, of course, AFM we know, high spatial resolution, and this large dynamic range. You can measure things down to a few piconewtons to several hundred, even thousands of piconewtons, so nanometer range. And so these are usually used to measure strong interactions, relatively strong. And there is older technique, microneedles, the forces on the order of piconewton, and the resolution is on the order of nanometers. And the cantilever is relatively soft, and these are used to study myosin, motor proteins, and DNA, chitin, it's a muscle protein, the strength. And it's a good control. The spring constant is relatively soft. Flow field is one of the ongoing ones, one of the earlier ones. And you can imagine just flow in. Originally, people used to stretch polymers, DNA. And force is on the order of the piconewton range, and the resolution is slightly, spatial resolution is slightly lower, and about tens of nanometers. And so these are used to study DNA dynamics. The advantage is that it has good buffer exchange. So if you want to study the molecule under different solution conditions, you use the flow, you can switch the solution. And it's relatively simple, easy to set up. So people can now do a microfluid and have to do small channels and study things, and you can rapid mixing type of things. Magnetic field is the force is relatively speaking weak, on the order of piconewton or even sub-piconewton, and spatial resolution is tens of the nanometers. So these are usually used to study DNA entropic elasticity, how about isomers, activities or enzymes that work on DNA. And these one we either usually attach magnetic beads to them, and so the magnetic field can induce the rotating field, so you can rotate it. So this has advantage of being used in the torque to measure the torque. Photon field is one of the most popular thing, at least in the U.S. It's the optical tweezers. The force range usually is on the order of few piconewtons to tens of piconewtons, and spatial resolution about nanometer. And the cantilever stiffness is really soft, relatively speaking. And so these are usually being used to measure molecular motors, RNA unfolding, and it's very good for high force resolution because its force is very accurate. And then of course the electric field, that's a very wide range of force one can detect. And however, it does not look very high tech, but in biology that's probably like one of the most used technique. We all see those electrophoresis gels. So if you look at the biology, they always show you a gel with all those bars. You wonder what it is. Basically, it's just a charge to mass ratio. You apply the electric field, like all the molecules run through the gels, and the one with the high charge to mass ratio will go faster, right? So the heavier one will stay behind. And then they put a ruler there so you can have an idea of what the size is. Of course, the masses, but of course it depends on other factors. But for biological system, that's very convenient.
So I've heard of all of these except for microneedles. Could you say a couple of words about?
That's somewhat an old technique. Sometimes they use bubbles and then study membranes. It's not too popular. I don't really see too many things, right? Too many publications on that, right? So mainly, I think the single molecules, optical tweezers, AFM, magnetic tweezers, and the rest of the stuff like the ensemble. So, and we probably have seen this before last week, and so we have a suggestion why people do single molecules. Look at those boxes. Those two are on the order, have the energy dissipation in the order of kTs, so we can test and study the fluctuation theorem. So single molecule, single RNA hairpin, the beads rotating, and so relative to a big system like a steam engine. So so we can see the biological molecules really have the both the length scale and the energy scale on that order that's convenient for this type of study. And then these are some examples people have studied, and then some information came out from the studies. So one of the earliest ones is the double-stranded DNA. People unzip them or mechanical melting. One can study the free energy, the cost for melting on the order of a few kcals per mole, and the force is on the order of 10-20 picomoles. And other things like moving from DNA, maybe just RNA, so a few RNAs like P5, maybe the hairpins, and then the hairpins are much longer, so the length scale is slightly different, and then the energy for unzipping the whole hairpin is slightly larger too, from the order of tens of kcals per mole. And then one of the most studied proteins is I-27, the domain from chitin. It's a muscle protein that is involved in the muscle contraction, both in the heart and cardiac muscle and the skeletal muscle. And so that was being characterized, very well characterized, and now it's being used as the standard for AFM. So the free energy of unfolding is about 7.6 kcals per mole, and the force we measure is on the order of 100 piconewtons, so usually it's done with AFM, although earlier studies were done using optical tweezers. And so one can get a lot of information in the kinetics and the distance from folded to transition states. And a similar protein like fibronectin is also widely studied, and many of these have beta sheet structures. And then so some of these proteins have repeat units. Those are convenient for AFM studies. I'll tell you why later. And like ubiquitin, and so a lot of parameters are characterized too. So here's AFM. That's what we do. So I'll focus a little bit on the AFM, and also we understand AFM. So we'll go from there, and then the other techniques are similar. So AFM, the main thing is the cantilever. The laser would shine on the back of the cantilever to measure the cantilever bending. So the position, basically, the cantilever bending will be recorded on the photodetector, so that will give a voltage, and then that can be converted to how much the cantilever bend. And if we know the spring constant of the cantilever, then we know the force on the molecule. And for AFM, yes.
How do you determine the spring constant of the cantilever?
Well, we use the thermal fluctuation, basically using equipartition theorem, so looking at the thermal fluctuation, right? So that's pretty standard. And then that technique is getting better now. It's reasonably accurate now. So usually for AFM, one side of the molecule, one end is attached to the surface via non-specific binding. Sometimes there are some thiol bonds to promote the binding with those surfaces. Sometimes there isn't. And occasionally there are some functionalizer, but usually it's not. And they stick to the surface. And the other end sticks to the tip. And most of the time it was not functionalized either. One could, if you want a specific binding site or handle to form a molecule. And the real operation, during the operation, actually the state moves rather than the tip is moving. So, but anyway, the net effect is the distance between the tip and the surface is getting longer and longer. And then first you stretch the molecule, make it straight, and then if you want to continue to stretch it, eventually it will break. And so what determines when it breaks? Basically, the weakest link, right? So the breaking point, it depends on basically the weakest bond. So in your system, once you stretch it to the highest stress, whatever it's going to let go, that's going to determine when the peak is going to occur. Yes?
When you prepare your samples, do you know that you have like an end-to-end on the substrate or the tip? Or
we don't. Well, AFM actually it could pick up any parts of the molecule. That's why usually AFM is done with long molecule, and it does not matter where you pick it up. So maybe we'll talk about a little bit about that later. Optical tweezers, I'll talk about that. Optical tweezers is a little bit different. Here. So optical tweezers usually it was a beam trapped with a laser, and the other beam is controlled sometimes by another laser trap, sometimes by a micropipette. And usually the beam is functionalized, and the molecule is functionalized. So there's some connection between the beam, the functional group of the beam, and the functional group of the molecule, and then they will bind. So basically you have a beam going in the fishing and maybe bind to that group, basically tag in the molecule once you have a hold of it and you form it. But it has its disadvantage too, because the strength is determined by how strong your bond is. But then again, usually in an optical tweezer, you don't measure very high forces anyway. Yes.
So like, can you engineer the binding site to put a particular strength? So like if you're interested in pulling DNA, can you engineer, for example, a sequence to ensure that you know that it's not going to break on your handle, and that it is going to break on somewhere in the actual strand of DNA that you're pulling?
So one could engineer certain things. So one can actually put specific tags, and I think that some group has done that. You can put something in the middle, and actually the Kusumandi's group has done that, and have a beam in the middle, and so they spin the DNA and produce a torque. For the question of you want to make sure it doesn't break, the handle doesn't break before that. I think the point is you want to study the molecule. So if you engineer something, it depends if that's going to affect what you're going to study, right? Then you're studying the engineer things. You want to study really what the strength of this molecule. You just have to study the way it is. Usually the handle is long enough that it could at least pull it to like 100 picometers. So that would be pretty much the limit of what the laser trap can detect anyway. So it has not been a big problem.
What did you say was the control parameter in your previous slide? Was the distance between the base of the chip and the substrate?
Yes, basically the distance the substrate moves. So the absolute distance is not necessarily known, but like if you have a 0, and then how much that moved, you know.
And how do you know the extension of the tip wobbles, right?
Right. So
The extension is
so that we measure, we know how much the cantilever bend. Right, so that's what we measure with the laser for AFM. So we subtract that. So we move the stage, right? So we know how much we move the stage. And when we move the stage, it's going to pull the cantilever down. That's actually a very important point. And later on, next lecture, we'll talk about density ecology. But anyway, so that's the same thing. So either it's the AFM, the cantilever is going to bend, and the optical tweezer, the B is going to move away from the laser center. And how much it moves is measured. That is actually the measured parameter. So the two parameters are being measured. One is how much this thing bend or move. And then the other one is how much your, say, the pipette or the stage move. Right? So you know, so the cantilever bending that contributes to some small distance change, and then that later on, if you want the molecular entropy distance, you subtract that from how much your stage move, and then that move, the move, how much the cantilever move also tells you how much force is on the molecule. So basically, you record the force as a function of basically time, and then also the stage movement as a function of time. And then you can get all the force extension curves.
How do you know how many molecules have attached to your tip?
That's a good question. So in AFM, we don't. So what we would need to do is try to minimize the possibility of having two molecules attached to that. So basically, if you pull it continuously, they will have to fall detach from the tip or the surface. So if you have two, you're likely to see two things fall off, right? So one is going to break, the other one is going to break later. So that usually can be determined because the detachment peak is very different from the molecular, say, unfolding peak. So we want to minimize that. So in the AFM, usually we do, it's like a fishing. So we try to put the success rate at below 5%. So in that case, there's very little probability you'll pick two at a time. It's still possible, but usually you can see it. But usually that does not even happen. So really, it's like a fishing. They go in and out, and they look good. And if we do folding, refolding experiment, then that will be more obvious. You go find one, you pull, and you see a curve, and you let it relax and refold, and then you fold it again. And those are repeatable. And that tells you pretty much it's just one.
So here the optical trap is folding diagonal or something different.
What was the question? Optical trap is
this optical trap is folding diagonal trap or what kind of optical trap?
Well, I think people have done the different kind. I don't do optical traps, so I don't really know the state of the art. I think people do different things. But basically, the laser light is focused on this, and you just look at how much the beads move away from the center, and then they get imaged. So I have the next slide to show you a little bit the biological attachment. So in the case of virus packaging, this is the bacterial virus. So the bead, so it's functionalized with streptavidin, and then the biotin is attached to the DNA itself. And so these two will bind. So that means this bead can grab this DNA. And then the DNA is actually in the capsid, so this is the virus, bacteriophage. And then there's an antibody. This is just the way to attach this to the bead, and the pipette is moving. So what in reality is you do imaging of the laser. You use the laser to see the image of the bead, and you know how much the bead moved away from the center. So from there, you can convert that to the force, and with the spring constant of the trap. And that's also done by measuring the thermal fluctuation of the trap B. So, and then the trap B, the laser trap is assumed to be behave like follow Hooke's law, just like the cantilever spring. And the resolution is on the order of piconewtons. Okay. And the magnetic beads, the basic principles are the same. It's just magnetic, you can do using a rotating field, you can induce a rotating motion. And in this particular case, in the DNA, you can winding, and then it will, if we rotate it, it actually will induce that like a superfolding, and then you either over one or under one, it will have that force on that. So basically, it induces that, it will produce a force that will basically get the bead to, basically the distance between the bead and the surface will shrink because it will have to introduce that structure here. So that was pretty well correlated with the term introduced on the molecule. So, but the magnetic force is usually, the force is only measured up to like 30 piconewtons. But it has, basically one can study different things. So you could, people also have the same, you can have, you can have polling in addition to port. So there's another example of using magnetic tweezers, and the principles are the same, but with the functional group is in one end is functionalized and get attached to the surface, and one can do some spacers, and the other end is functionalized and then attached to the functional group on the beam, and then in between you can have handles, and you can do put whatever molecule you're interested in. In this case, it's a double stranded DNA, and this was about the DNA unzipping, and one can see the distance as a function of the time, and if one pole at a constant force, that means it's a feedback. Okay, so you can see these pulse time. Sometimes basically DNA will get longer and longer, and then it'll have some pulse, and then it'll go in steps, and these seem to be sequence dependent, and one can align. So these are a few examples. Yes.
So are these different samples or different runs of the same sample? Or?
There are different runs on the same samples, and the dashed line and solid lines are two different forces. I think one's 15 piconewtons, the other one's 20. So it's saying like it seems to have a repeat. At some point, they always have like under some particular position, they have these steps.
There's no feedback of the magnetic tweezers, is there? Isn't it just based on the strength of the field?
If they want to keep constant force, they will have to have a feedback to keep the constant force. If they want to. In this particular case, this one is polling. So you pull it, and then you want to keep the force on the molecule constant. And so it depends on the molecule. If you pull at a constant speed, the molecule will have a different interaction, right? So if you pull some structure, it will have a higher resistance. So if you pull on the same speed, you're not going to keep the force constant. So you have to have some feedback. It's the same thing with the optical tweezers and everything. One does not have to have a constant force and does not have to have a feedback. But if you want to do constant force experiments, then you turn on the feedback.
How do they join the molecule to the bead? Do they use chemical receptors, for example?
Right, so there are different ways. Usually it's the streptavidin and avidin, biotin and streptavidin. So one is functional, one is on the beam, one is attached to the molecule, and those will bind. That's typical. And there are different antibody and receptor binding, whatever that fits your purpose. But the typical one is strep is easier.
Can you do constant force experiments with the reagent?
Yes.
How?
Just have a feedback loop that's electronics.
What you control is the position of the ring?
Yes. Yes. So for every I think this is the same for every technique. Right. In fact, I will talk a little bit about it with the constant force in the third lecture. Okay. Yes.
With the optical tweezers, how is the interaction between the beams and the laser?
How
does laser light trap the beam?
How does the laser?
The laser light, how does it trap the beam?
Just a very intense focus the laser, the B. So basically, it's okay. I don't have the slide for that. So it's basically, the laser creates a field. It's like a harmonic potential, and it traps the beam. And then if you have a B away from the center, you know how much force it is. And then of course, if you go outside the harmonic potential, then the trap is gone. So you lose that B. So
you say on the previous slide, the force is measured by imaging thermal fluctuations in position. That's strange. I mean, we think that the force normally, on average, increases a little bit and the thing gets stretched. But fluctuations only tell you what fluctuations are. So I'm not sure what you mean.
well, that's not okay. So basically, it was just it's saying. So it's just a calibration. So basically, using equipartition theorem. So you measure like a free thermal vibration, and then you can convert it to the energy of the cantilever, and then you know the spring constant. That's a basic calibrating the spring constant. And once you get that, and then if you can image how far the B move away from the center of the trap, then you can convert that to force, right? F equals to kx. Once you get k, you just need to measure x and then f.
But I thought the beam only sits in the center of the trap.
Oh, when you pull it, it moves away from the center of the trap. So like this. And then basically it's this laser field created like a harmonic potential here. That's how you get trapped. Okay. And then if you move away with it experiences force. Pretty much obeys Hooke's law. Right. So this one is away from the center. When you pull it.
So there's two spring constants, one of the molecule and the other of the beam.
Right. So this is similar to AFM. So Judinsky has a picture as well on your T-shirt now, right? This guy is blowing on it. So the cantilever is the spring, and the molecule is the rubber band. It has a different spring constants, different elastic behavior. Yeah. So that's good. So understand that, then we'll move on to different systems. So I'm not going to go into details in this lecture. I just want to give you a flavor of what kind of systems one can look at. So the first was the earlier experiment was an obvious application, so molecular motors. And in this particular one, actually to do the trap. Both beams were trapped by laser beam. And the molecular motor actually walk on, say, some anyway, so like a myosin will walk on this microtubule. So it will generate some force. And sometimes people measure stall force, and sometimes if you hold on to it, and you will see if you have a constant force, you see it goes step by step, and you can sort of look at the see the step, and then you can get a distribution of the step size, and then they have this model say how these molecular models walk on this microtubule and based on the step size. So that seems like an obvious application because you have pores, you have distance, and you look at that. But later on, basically, Bustamante pioneered a lot of these unfolding experiments, stretching. Then that becomes relevant to these thermodynamics, and pretty much the focus of this summer school. But anyway, so it's a lot of information. And people have obtained a lot of information from these experiments, but there are a lot of still there that have not been basically analyzed. So one could use the pipette, the beam to track DNA, single or double-strand DNA. So it depends on the system, depends on the questions you want the answer. And you can look at different reactions like DNA replications. And so if one pulls some DNA, so if one look at the DNA, you pull on it, you can see if you just pull double-strand DNA, it will follow this curve. It's like a one-line chain. And we don't know now. The double-strand DNA behave like that. And then it's also possible once you stretch it, there's overstretching transition, and then the DNA is going to so-called melting into single-strand DNA, right? So there's overstretch transition, the blue curve. Then it will fall, the double-strand DNA will fall apart into single-strand DNA. So this experiment is showing you could stretch them, and then they fall apart to single-strand DNA, and then you relax the DNA, it will come back, and then you stretch it again. If you wait long enough, sometimes it will form double-strand DNA, and then you will follow the double-strand DNA curve. So if you don't let it say rehybridize, you stretch it again, you see it follow single-strand DNA. Okay. So that's one way to make single-strand DNA and do basically stretch the relaxation on single-strand DNA. So that's really interesting. So basically there's, so we have this whole curve. And so far the information, the numbers we'll get is like integrate the area and get an answer. So it basically reduced to one number. So we know obviously the whole process is being observed. And so one earlier example is there was a theory predicting DNA has all different phases based on the torque and the force. And there was actually experiment done to sort of correlate that. So we can see a DNA has a different transitions and follow different curves, and depending on how much torque, basically how many terms you have to introduce on the DNA. So what they did is they have a bead in the middle of the DNA and they use the flow field to basically spin that bead that introduces a lot of terms in the DNA. So it's sure enough, it almost, well, one did not get the whole phase diagram, but one gets several points in the phase diagram that seem to correlate with what predicting the theory. Yes.
Is it phase diagram for a specific length of DNA? Is that for a particular number of base pairs, or?
Well, I think that that's for like infinitely long DNA. I think that's for the background. Yeah, in principle. Because if you have really short DNA, that really does not work. That it really depends differently. They don't really have phase transition to have short DNA. It has melting, but don't really have phase transition. So usually, I believe it's infinitely long. Well, in reality, it's not infinitely long, but once you go more than several hundred or 1,000 bases, it's behaving like an infinite long.
So this is sort of like a rubber band then?
Well,
like on the
right.
multiplane.
Right. So basically, right. So DNA does behave like, especially double-stranded, it behaves like a rubber band. So if you do something like it, it's going to behave like that. So and then the next is slightly more complicated: RNA folding terpins and structures. And so they did so similar. You see with the biotin, and then in this case, it's a different functional group on both two sides. So the beads is functionalized with the streptavidin, right? And then so it binds to biotin, and the other beads functionalized with the different groups. And then with the DNA handle, grab the RNA, and RNA hairpin is in the middle. So in one direction, you can unzip the hairpin, and then you can relax it, and then the hairpin will reform. The hairpin is the reverse of basically hybridization. It forms reasonably readily. It's not like protein. Protein folding is a little bit different. It's not really, you don't really see the reverse curve that much. But in the case of RNA Unfolding, you can actually come back. So depending on the speed, you can have the different characteristics, and then that's actually later on the system they use for testing resistance equality. And so there's another interesting system here. So they got a lot of information from these RNA kinetics. So they have the trace, the full RNA. So the RNA unfolding behaves like a state-to-state, two-state system. So it's either folded state or unfolded state, the hairpin. So we saw the jump. So they hold the molecule at constant force. So depending on the force, if it's a low force, you can see from here, a low force, the molecule is going to stay in this state, right? Folded state. A high force molecule, 99.9% of the time, is going to stay the actually high force is going to stay in the open state. Low force is going to stay in the closed state. But if it's an intermediate force, like near the peak, the molecule is going to jump between two states. So they actually saw that. So we're looking at like on the order of 14 piconewtons, the molecule will jump between these two states, and one can get from these traits to see how much time the molecule spends at the closed state versus the open state. And then from there, you see the fraction unfolded, and then do that, plot that as a function of force, and we can get this curve, and this could fit with the kinetic equation, and then compare the number from the 12 measurements. So we'll probably have more time to talk about this third lecture. The one question is, one thing that happens. So even though the single molecule manipulation get all these data, all the traces, in the end, all the numbers get reduced. So all they got is the percentage of this molecule, the percent time spending on one state versus another. So basically, the detail of the jumping is gone, right? So only get the information like how much time, and then that reduced to one dot on this plot, and this plot gets fit into with the one equation and reduced to one number. So all these manipulation and all the data, eventually still collect all the data and basic group them together and analyze them together and get one number. So at that time, it was very good to say, okay, so at that time, we want to prove the single molecule measure the molecular property is basically real, because we get the same result they get the same result as in the bulk measurement. But this cannot keep going on forever because in a single molecule, all the technique is doing is to get the same result as the bulk measurement. So there's no point doing it, right? So, but initially, one will need to prove this technique. One needs to do that. So let's see if we can get the same thing. And beyond that, then let's see if we can get some new things that nobody knows what the answer is, except if we trust the results from a single molecule and whatever number comes up from the single molecule study, that is the answer.
Is that a different temperature so you can see the entire contribution to the molecule?
Well, I don't know. I don't think it was that in that paper. I don't know if they did that. But that was a good point. Actually, we did some protein folding. We did the temperature within the study, so we have some estimated temperature. So we'll talk about that in the next lecture. And then another example, protein folding. So we do DNA and RNA protein, and then virus and protein and DNA and complexes. So this is one of the earlier experiments. Called Reed and Fernandez, and they stretch the muscle protein titin. This is one of the native titin for chopped off. And titin is one of the biggest molecule in the human body. And it has many domains, about 300 domains. And each domain can unfold, so they look at a segment of that has tens of domains, and they can unfold basically sequentially, and each domain unfolding will produce a peak. And so you open it, and then they produce this so-called sawtooth pattern peak. So then, yes.
From all these unfolding peaks, can you tell which domains are unfolding at each particular time?
No. So first, you don't really know, and secondly, because of fluctuations, even the same domain will the peak height will be different each time. So even if you have identical domains, they will unfold at different force due to fluctuations. You have a distribution. One possibility is if you have two domains and they have very different unfolding force, which is related to the basically transition state, the barrier height. If they're very different, maybe you can see two different groups, and people have done that, like I-27 versus I-28. The difference is almost like factor of 2. Then you see the distribution, but the distribution center a very different force versus the other. Maybe you can see that, but usually not. Yes.
Excuse me, are these constant length experiments?
These are done
Constant length experiments or constant
constant velocity.
Constant.
Okay, right. So we just pull at the constant velocity.
So how do these observations change with the cantilever stiffness?
Quantitatively, maybe a little bit, but qualitatively, not really. Because basically, the cantilever is supposed to be a good spring. It has a good response. So it shouldn't affect. So the coupling between the cantilever and the molecule, it should be good enough that we actually see the response from the molecule.
But the properties that are measured are those of the molecule plus the cantilever.
The system, okay, so that's interesting concept. We'll talk about that during Jasinski's equality. But what we measure here is the force. So it's the force, the balancing, the basically cantilever restoring force. So assuming that at any given time, the force on the cantilever and the force on the molecule is balanced. So the force is the force. So we measure the force on the cantilever. Then we assume that's the force on the molecule. So we're not right. So the cantilever is used as a measuring tool. It does not affect that much. But of course, when you have the cantilever, if the force constant is too close to the molecule, there's some complicated things one need to take into account. But the system, like this type of the cantilever spring constant, usually it does not affect that too much. We have done a little bit of studies. It affects a little bit, but once you, I think the cantilever actually is too soft, actually produces some problems. Okay, again, so this is something I will ask you later. And so, especially initially, when people did protein folding problem, you have all these solvers. So we have one has these sort of curves and a lot of data. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So in the salty fiber, is the bottom curve the relaxing back?
Yes.
So you don't see it refold.
Right. Exactly. That's what I said. Protein does not refold. Basically, does not refold that fast. So you don't, and also it does not have a strong enough force to actually go over the barrier and produce a force peak. So
basically,
it's not like a
basically
spring.
it's just like a piece of string that you're just collapsing.
Right. So the protein folding does not refold slowly. So if you relax and then all of a sudden and then it just forms that folded structure. There was one paper that reminds me, perhaps I'll mention that a little bit. It was a paper in Nature, nano spring behavior. There was one protein that behaves like a spring. Then it refolds, and then you can see that refolding curve because it behaves like a spring. But most proteins don't, right? They're not like a spring, so it's linear. And then basically they refold and then they fold and they fold, right? And then when they're unfolded, it's just slowly relaxed. So you don't really see that keep coming back. So you relax and it's flat, and then you wait long enough, and then you fold again, you will see these soldiers happen. And with all the data, so what people typically do is you look at these force peaks, you get the number, get the height of these force peaks, and then you collect the histogram. And the histogram has you can use the most probable peak force. So all the curves eventually reduce to one number, and that number is here. This number, unfolding force, and then this is the molecular approach. Just extrapolate that to zero force, and then get some kinetics information and compare it to both chemical measurements. And then at that time they say, oh, they're similar. But later on, there were papers say, oh, they're not necessarily similar. And then, of course, there's a debate of which one's measuring the right thing. And we'll talk about that later. But anyway, so all these things, all the data here, and eventually get reduced to one number, the kinetic barrier. So versus in bulk measurements, usually sometimes you do just measure one number and put it there. But the single molecule measure a lot of things, eventually still get put into one number. And then you can see bulk measurements, it's much easier to get those numbers. You can do a lot of measurements. Single molecule, that each point is a lot of work. So it just eventually just have fewer points, right? So what's the advantage? And well, I'll show you a little bit preview of my next lecture, and then also we have Chris Giudice give the lecture in the first week and get everybody's interest. So basically, it's until the Giudice's equality, people were not getting the information from basically trace yet. But Giudice's equality basically requires you get the information from the whole trace. So basically, what happened in between, that's something no other technique can see. So this is a system we did with the Titan. So these are serially linked, identical to link 527. So each one behaves like a rubber band. And then the cantilever is like a spring. And you pull it, you get that information. So instead of just getting the peak, and eventually you have the thousands of a peak and reduce to one number, one can now see these traces. It tells you a lot. So one thing about, so we can see that now, and the single molecule experiments. First, okay, let's just talk about single molecule in general. The 60s, that was fluorescence, for example, right? And you look at one molecule, the fluorescence going on and on. So instead of like bulk measurements, basically the averaging. So a single molecule, you measure each one and collect the histogram, and then you get a number that say similar to bulk. It just makes it more work. But the advantage for doing single molecule, at least in fluorescence, is if you want to know the start of the reaction, bulk measurement does not distinguish that. So all these, so all the molecules, they start and end at a different time, but you have an average. So when you do single molecule, you can see where it starts, where it ends. Okay. In the single molecule manipulation, that's another step. It's very different from regular, so for single molecule. Because so for example, for fluorescence, people will just observe, like a passive observer, right? You don't really do anything to the molecule other than putting a fluorescent tag. You see what molecule does, so the fluorescence go on and on. Manipulation, you actually force the molecule to do what it usually won't do. So if you wait for the molecule to unfold, okay, it's going to take, well, in this particular half-life, on the order of an hour. And then we know very well, if you look at the free energy landscape, you're never going to see the molecule on the top of the free energy landscape, right? All you see is the molecule at the bottom as well, like in the valley. So you don't see anything in between. You see it's folded or unfolded, right? So the fluorescence is on and off. But for single manipulation, you force the molecule to go over the barrier at the time scale you wanted to go, and then you're measuring all the response. So we got all the information. Everything happened from here to there. So now the question is, what did you do to the system? Basically, this is a non-equilibrium measurement. So you pull it real hard, right? So you know how the molecule goes from exactly every step, from one side of the mountain to the other. But the molecule is doing things under your influence. So how do you convert that to the property of the molecule, right? So whatever you measure should not depend on how the quantity you measure, like actually the quantity eventually you get off should not depend on how you measure it, right? So it shouldn't depend on how fast you pull it. But we know the data we got, it does depend on how fast you pull it, right? So we need to reduce that. In the past, people used this extrapolation and Jasinski's equality. That's how it's going to. We'll talk about that, how you reduce that to equilibrium properties. So that's, I think it's the first step, the Jasinski's equality. I think that the big contribution is it actually tells us we can now see the entire trajectory of the molecular reaction now. And at this stage, I have to say, it's not very accurate for any single molecule measurements. We get the same number. Most likely, the bulk measurement is going to be more accurate because that's average over at least several 10 to the 23rd molecule versus single molecule you can measure 1,000. It's still nowhere close to a bulk measurement. But we can see something you never see with bulk measurements. So that's something for you to think. What other information you can get? So I'll tell you, we're beginning to get information out of it, but it's still a lot one cannot get. And so I'll leave that to the theorists. You can come up with a new idea, new scheme, or just from the already experiment done, you should be able to tell us that, oh, there's something you can get from here. And with this, the advance of the non-equilibrium statistical mechanics, we should be able to see a lot more information for non-equilibrium. Okay, so I'll leave this for the next lecture.
Questions?
So very clear. Very clear on everything.
No, well, So you mentioned that you need to equate the force on the cantilever to the force that the molecule is experiencing, but we've done some work where you actually don't need to do that, right? You don't need to make that equality necessarily. You don't need to instantaneously the force that the cantilever is experiencing to the reflection to get the molecule experiencing internally.
Well, we do assume that because we assume that's the force. Okay, so the question is so we only measure the force on the molecule. So the question is that do we need to make the assumption that's the force on we measure the force on the cantilever, right? Do we need to make assumption that that's the force on the molecule? We actually basically in all the conversion they assume that's the force on the molecule. I would say the zeroth order that's correct. I'm pretty sure if it's non-equilibrium, maybe it's slightly some correction can be done. But at this point, with this kind of accuracy,
so in some of the models that we dropped on the data that you guys had, we're not making that assumption. Just wanted to make that clear.
Well, all the force we assume is the force of the molecule. We don't assume it's the force on the cantilever.
You can model the force of the molecule. You observe the force on the cantilever.
Right.
Yeah. So you don't need to make them equal.
But nobody modeled the force on the molecule.
Well, we have.
Well, the model. The model is one thing. The model you have to.
No, the model might not be right.
Right, the model may be wrong. So so that's one thing you can work on. If you have a good model, that's good. But if we don't know the model is right or wrong, we want to make an assumption that's we don't want to over-interpret it, right? So once we know there's a good model, we know how much force we measure on the cantilever, and exactly how much force is actually on the molecule, then we can do that. But at this point, that's the assumption.
Well, why would they not do the same? Is there fluid around?
I mean, there friction, right? Right, or some non-equilibrium.
Elastic properties of your linker, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. Linker. That's another. Right. Linker. Okay. Linker is another layer of a complexity. So yes, that's true. So optical tweezers. That's a good point. So the optical tweezers, they have a very specific point. You grab them. But you have introduced an extra linker. Then you have to decouple the linker composition. AFM doesn't have that. You don't really know where you grab it. So, like an earlier question, so AFM, you don't really know where you grab it. It's most likely it's probably somewhere in the middle of the molecule. But the point is, it does not matter too much. Usually the AFM, we don't analyze the data that's near the surface, like the first 50 nanometers, that has all kind of gravity surface effect. And once the molecule is away from the surface, we look at the force that should be free from other things. And then basically, if you have a repeat unit, it really doesn't matter where exactly you grab the molecule, as long as you're grabbing the point beyond the two ends of that repeat unit, right? Because the repeat unit, the two ends are connected to other molecules. These 2 points are well defined. So as soon as you grab somewhere here, and if you just want to look at what's the force, how you grab to pull this apart, you know that has to go through those 2 points, those terminals that's connected with the protein. So that partially answers the question. And then basically most of the experiments is done with both optical tweezers and AFM. The results are the same. So that sort of proved that point too.
Other questions? Well, I have one. How much these results depend on the precise characteristic of the molecule?
You're talking about the force?
The different results. How much the results depend on the precise molecule, if it's a biological molecule or something else?
So this kind of result. So this really depends on the basic elastic property of the molecule. So for polymer, it usually behaves like a one-line chain or freely joined chain. So that really, so single-strand DNA usually behave more like this big joint chain, double strand hormone chain. And then if it's the stiff spring, like some kind of solid, then it's probably like sort of more like a hook, behave like follow the hook law instead of right. So it completely depends on the molecule.
Any other question? Okay, thank you.